Hey guys, welcome to the Kane audio vlog. It's Friday, time for another Ask Me Anything. Usual rules apply. Comment anything you want below this video and I'll get back to you in next week's video. Before I look at last week's video, is there any house admin? I don't think there is. I can't even think what I've been doing this week. Mostly finishing off some projects for sync stuff. Still trying to sort out cameras, so I mentioned, you can't see it, the second camera I got. Now I've got a third camera, turned out to be a piece of crap, so getting rid of that and replacing it with a different one. I think my only option is to get another camera like the one you're watching me through right now. So it just means that the way I'm going to be filming the podcast will have to change somewhat. However, I am making progress in that, and later this year I think I should be good to launch properly. I've also booked myself into Amsterdam dance event this year as well, so hopefully I'll be able to meet up with some people, do some podcast interview type stuff there, probably in the hotel room, I guess will be the quietest place. But we'll see, so that's all good. Yeah, other than that, I don't think there's anything to report in terms of releases or news. I think that's it. So yeah, on with last week's video. Right, starting at the top. Casey Music. Hey Dom, congrats on your 50th AMA and your signing at Mousetrap. Thank you very much. Can't wait for that EP. Structures is still running in pretty much every set I play out. Awesome, cheers. Also can't wait for those interviews. Great, well I've just spoken about those. It is the little things from people who know the industry that you can learn a lot from. Yeah, well that's kind of exactly the point, is I figured as a producer, DJ, sound designer, whatever you want to call me, whatever it is I do, you know, I get interviewed by some magazines and whatever, and it's always the same question, especially when you go to an international gig or whatever, and there's a bit of press there, and they want to make a big deal, and obviously that's great, but they're always kind of completely removed from the industry, so they'll always ask the same questions of who's your favorite DJ, who's the next big thing, what's your favorite track out right now, what's your favorite album this year? And I think while those questions are fine for basic journo stuff, you guys watching this video are 99.9% producers. So I feel like watching interviews with other producers are usually a bit shit, because you're watching them, maybe they're on the radio, maybe they're on a podcast, but they're not normally covering covering the boring bits. Basically, they're trying to make it exciting, and sometimes, learning music production stuff is not exciting. It's not, this whole YouTube channel is kind of the opposite of that, where I guess if you look at a lot of music production YouTube channels and stuff, they're all snappy, exciting, and I kind of feel like that's great for learning basic stuff, but and that's absolutely fine, it's its own thing, but my channel is more about kind of the longer term stuff, I guess. So yeah, hopefully there'll be some decent people on that. Comment on your Behringer answer. The Model D is completely analog. There we go. I have it and love it. Do not know for the 808. Well, in which case that's great if they're analog, because I think a lot of people sell, or a lot of manufacturers sell stuff using the word analog without actually doing a full analog circuit, and that's a bit cheeky. But yeah, no, that's great if it is, and that kind of shows that, well, that's its selling point, I guess. So awesome. Somehow my question did not come through last week, so let's try again. Yeah, that keeps happening with some people. I'm looking to get a new set of speakers. Do you have any suggestions in the range of 500 to 600 euros? Thinking about the A5X from Adam Audio, but those tweeters are very, let's say, unique. Event high five. High five. Okay, I like the whole range of Adams. I've got to be honest. I've seen a fair few of them, from whether they be at friends' houses or studios for the bigger setups, and they seem like they're pretty good bang for buck. I'm not in any way, shape or form an expert on monitor speakers. I have to say that up front. I love my Event Opals. I know a few producers who have had Event Opals and then got rid of them because they didn't like them, which is fair enough. I also loved my Focals when I had those. But again, moving to the Opals, there was a huge leap. But it's one of those things where I think essentially you get what you pay for generally. Obviously there's, exceptions to the rule, but in that budget range, I think Adam are probably one of the better rated out of all the available options, I would say. So the A5Xs, I've heard good things. There's Event do some, I don't know what the price is, but I know they're a lot cheaper than the Opals. What are they called? Are the Event 2020s? I think they're around that kind of budget. So if they are similar, very similar budget, I couldn't tell you right now. In fact, I could have a look, couldn't I? Event 2020. And they're Opals. Now they're used. Well, I'm guessing they're a bit more than that used, so I guess you'd have thought they'd come up. Maybe they've stopped making them. What's this? Currently unavailable. Yeah, maybe they've stopped making them. Right, in which case, ignore everything I said. Forget those, because you might struggle to get support if you can find a pair, unless you buy them secondhand, I guess. But what I was going to say is, with these sorts of things, find a decent audio store, and that has both. If you narrow it down to say 2 or 3 models, and especially if you live near a city, and then find your nearest store that has those 2 or 3 models, and phone them up in advance and say, I'm gonna buy one of these 3, can you set them up for me so I can compare? Most stores, in fact any good store will do that for you, because they're going to get your commission. So it's in their interest to do that, and that way you can put them up side by side and really listen to, take your own music in as well, and listen to it, and you'll hear little bits and pieces that you think are either good or bad or whatever. Some people always rated Genelec speakers. I never rated Genelecs of any shape or size, unless you're talking crazy expensive ones. But for normal studio budget, the Genelecs I always found, whenever I used them in a particular studio, I forget what model numbers they were, but I always felt they made things sound too good. The bass was always really creamy smooth, and the high end was always, that was creamy as well. Everything was just creamy sounding, and it wasn't giving you that sharp precision in the high end or low end that they never seemed to distort, they never seemed to clip, they were never dry. Everything just sounded rich and creamy. And for a lot of producers, they always rated those monitor speakers, but for me, I just felt like they were just masking everything, and they weren't revealing the naked mistakes of your music, basically. And so yeah, it's up to you, basically, is what I'm saying. But yeah, I do, after all that rant, I do rate the Adams. Reality on X Productions, 7th of June. Do you use clippers? Wait, what? 7th of June? Oh, right, yeah, last week's video, I forgot I put that up there. I was like, what the hell, 7th of June? Yeah, so my Mousetrap release, which, yeah, I'm still waiting on 100% confirmation for that, which is why I only flashed it up on the screen. Do I use clippers? Maximizer for mastering. Do you cut high frequency 20k on master? Right, so do I use clippers? Clippers is a weird word. So nothing ever clips for me. But so a clipper isn't really an engineering term, so I'm struggling to work out what you mean by that. Nothing clips in my productions, and I don't use many limiters apart from right at the very end of a mixer master chain, so nothing really ever gets hot. But I do use saturation in my mix down, rarely the master, usually the mix down, because I'm very, very subtle with it, and I will only use, like 5% wet sort of thing. I don't use much, but it is there. Maximizers for mastering, yes, I do use a maximizer, but again, I only look for maybe 3 dB of gain reduction, so it's not, I'm not pushing things to any limits. Do you cut high frequency 20k on master? No, because there's probably not much need, especially in electronic music. I don't think we need to worry about high frequencies too much. Plus, at the end of the day, let's imagine you had a 40 kilohertz tone in your track. There aren't really any speakers or tweeters in most setups that would even reproduce 40 kilohertz, so there's not much worry. Even if it was there, it's not a big deal. Plus, at most mastering, you'll kind of have a roll off and everything anyway at those things, at those levels, so it's not really too much of an issue. The bigger issue is down in the low end, because human hearing doesn't go above 20k either. Let's remember that. So even if there were frequencies above 20k, you're not going to hear them, so it's not really going to do, unless it has a huge impact in lower frequencies that you can hear. But it's just so rare, it's not something I worry about. However, on the lower end of the spectrum, it's a completely different story, because we can hear down to 20 hertz, but actually 30 hertz is pretty horrible, and most speakers will really struggle to reproduce 30 hertz at 0 dB. So I think that's an issue, and to an extent 40 hertz is most sound systems will struggle to produce a 40 hertz sine wave with any clarity while playing a track on top. So those are the kind of the areas that are more problematic, I suppose. The average kind of baseline that we have in our music, and I'm being very general here, is sort of 80 hertz. So anything below 80 hertz is where you're starting to maybe have problems with how the sound system or the sound card or the production or anything is starting to struggle to deliver those frequencies, whereas the human ear can still hear way below that. So that's really where you get more problems. Personally, I wouldn't worry about 20 kilohertz too much. Anything above 15 kilohertz is not inaudible. I mean, I can still, last time I tested a year or two ago, I think I could still hear about 24 kilohertz, something like that. So I'm not saying don't ever think about it, but it's just not something to worry about, basically. Cavacay, cheers Dom, love the new intro. Cheers. Yeah, that took me a while, but I felt like when I first started this YouTube channel, I don't think I really knew what I wanted, and well, I still don't really know what I want, but I just enjoyed doing these weekly AMAs, and I figured I kind of need to tidy things up a bit, and So this temporary room that I'm in, as temporary as it is, let's be honest, it's been like 6 months now. So I felt it was long overdue a bit of a refurb, and once I'd done that, I kind of felt like my videos were starting to look a bit sharper, and I'd start paying more attention to the videos. So hopefully over time my videos will get a little bit more, I want to say professional, but they'll never look professional. So yeah, cheers. I'm liking the intro as well. Event, high five, and also music, high five. Congrats on 50 AMA episodes. Here's to 50 more at least. Hope so. Looking forward to the EP. This week's questions. How do you approach DJ bookings? Do you book your own travel and charge back expenses, or let the promoter sort things out? Before I read any more, I'll answer that. So there's no real hard and fast rules, and something that probably is worth mentioning is Europe and America are two very different places to organise gigs. So, for example, in America, I guess because the country is so vast, and I guess it's a really capitalist country as well, more so that it's probably the most capitalist in the world, I guess the way things work are just a bit different. So in America, what tends to happen is if you get booked for a gig, let's pretend you're British and you're doing a gig in America, they tend to just offer you a flat fee for that gig, and that doesn't include travel, hotel, anything like that. So this is why when you see a British person do some gigs in America, usually they'll do a series of gigs, because it's not crazy to fly to, well, New York at least, maybe not LA, but from here to fly to New York, do one gig and then come back. I mean, that's kind of your weekend gone, but it's not impossible. Whereas you'll notice most British DJs who go over to America, they tend to be there for maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks doing a tour. And the reason for that is because normally they'll get paid for each gig, but not their travel expenses. So it's not really, unless you're a superstar, you're not really making enough money to cover costs of expenses and stuff. Whereas in Europe, generally speaking, the promoters will include travel, hotel, food, whatever, as part of your cost, so that's all covered. And same again with Eastern Europe as well. So with my personal gigs, America I don't tend to play anyway, because work visas are really expensive and are kind of crazy to get over there. So I've not played that direction for a long time, and probably unlikely to unless I get to a position where I'm regularly touring or something, because it's just not in my interest to spend, it's like $2,000-3,000 to get a work visa, and then it only lasts, I think it's like a year, maybe 2 years at the most, and it's an absolute nightmare. You've got to go through the embassy and have interviews and supply magazine cuttings, and you've got to have letters from American promoters and companies who show that you're valuable in the industry. It's a whole big thing, and it's not something that I'm that bothered about doing unless I had a bunch of gigs to do in America. Certainly not worth going through. It takes about 6 months to get as well. So if somebody got in touch with me one day and said, "Oh, we've got a gig for you in Texas, do you want to do it? It's just this one-off." Well, no, not really, because it's not worth 6 months of jumping through hoops and paying an absolute fortune, plus flights, plus hotel, plus whatever else, just for this one gig. It'd have to be one hell of a gig. So that's why you don't see a lot of European producers of my level going over to America. They tend to, when they go over to America, they tend to be for a month, 2 months, maybe 6 months, and some of them even just move over there because it's just much easier to organise gigs. So going back to mine, I don't tend to do America. Europe I do. Eastern Europe I've always done a lot. So I have an agent for Eastern Europe, and he just does everything. So that's obviously easy for me because he plans everything and I don't have to think about it. So that's good. But the rest of Europe, generally, I won't treat a gig as confirmed until the promoter has sent me the flight tickets, and that's usually how I sort of work, if I'm honest, because you'll find for any of you guys who are starting to get international gigs, I sort of recommend you do the same, really. It's a tricky one, so generally they'll pay for your hotel, your flight, whatever, and give you a fee on top. That's usually how it works all around Europe. So to be honest, I don't think I'd accept anything less than that. The other thing I would mention is that, especially like with Eastern Europe, again, it's kind of tricky getting visas, but you have to, and it is what it is. So that needs to be included, and you can kind of, I think after a few years of doing it, you start gauging. There are little signals that tell you how committed a promoter is as well, and this is kind of the important bit, is that if you, for example, had a gig with say 2 or 3 weeks notice somewhere in Europe, then they're probably not that committed, and I feel like that gig could quite easily be cancelled and maybe won't happen. Whereas if they're sort of going a month or any more than sort of 4 weeks in advance, then they're pretty committed. But even still, I've always said yes to gigs, but I will always make it clear that I usually request 50% of my fee up front as a deposit, because I think that shows that they're committed. And I think people forget that as a DJ, when you get your gig booked, you're not just working for 2 hours. That gig and the payment and everything includes a day of travel either side of the gig, which can quite often be really stressful and annoying because you get cancelled flights or taxis turn up late, or trying to get from one place to another is just a nightmare. It can be stressful. It can be at 4 o'clock in the morning, or it could be at rush hour, or depending on which way you're travelling and all sorts of things. So that gets pretty complicated. Plus you've got the weeks of sorting out your music. Hey, you're all DJs, you know what it's involved. So usually I would sort of say 50% deposit, and the flight and the gig isn't 100% confirmed in my head until I've got the flight tickets in my hand, because I've had many gigs in the past where everything appears 100% confirmed, but I'm just waiting for them to send me the flight tickets or the flight confirmation, and that doesn't happen until and then I'm maybe there. I have had gigs where I've been convinced everything is going ahead, and I've actually got to the airport waiting for them to send me the flight confirmation number of the booking, and they're telling me go to the airport, we're just doing whatever and getting it to you. So I've gone to the airport, I've sat there for hours, my flight's gone, and it turned out they didn't even book a flight for me. So I think you get stung by a few of those sorts of non-events, and you quickly start learning you've got to start putting your foot down with stuff. So so do promoters tend to pay in advance into an escrow account or after the show? So most promoters will try and just pay you after the show, because let's be honest, most promoters, that's the other thing, is with UK gigs, then it's anyone's guess, because I'm in the UK, so travel is easy, that's all done. Usually they'll pay for a hotel if it's sort of further than a couple of hours drive. Beyond that, you don't, they're not going to pay expenses like food, unless they're just nice guys and they take you out for a meal, which some promoters are. So that's the UK thing. Escrow accounts, not really. I mean, that's for the big league stuff, I think. I think it, when you're at my level and below, it's more just you trust people or you don't trust people, which is why I try and get 50%. But there are some that if they can justify why they can't offer a 50% deposit, or if they can at least give me, like I say, the flight tickets and stuff in advance, then I kind of know that it's happening. I know they're committed, and I know they've put money into it, so they're risking their own stuff as well. So it's kind of one of those sorts of situations. I remember getting paid always being a hassle in the old days, but I'm told it's more civilized these days. Yeah, I think the industry is more of a business these days, and it's seen as more of a business. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of shady promoters out there. And do you know what? I'll retract that. It's not just shady promoters. There's a lot of stupid promoters out there. That's not much better, but there's a lot of people out there who will book an event, they'll book a big club and a big artist, and they'll put on this event, and then they don't really promote it very well, and they just expect that if you book this name, people will turn up, and that's not always the case. Unless you're booking superstars, then that's not really how it works. An event needs a loyal following to follow your brand, not just the DJs. It's not about headline grabbers, and I think that's important for a promoter to remember. The responsibility of a night being a success is really on them as a promoter, as much as they try and push it to the talent. The talent are just showing up and being a talent. It's not their job to get bums on seats. So I think where it used to be a hassle, I think it still is a hassle in the lower levels, because they'll put on an event and they'll offer to pay you X amount, and then they don't sell any tickets, and it's basically 20 of their friends turn up who were guest list anyway, and then they struggle to find the cash, and they didn't have the capital in the first place. However, these days there are more and more promoters out there who have the capital, and by law in the UK, you're not supposed to put on an event that you can't pay for up front by law. Doesn't mean everyone follows that law, but it's there for a reason. So I think generally speaking, the industry's got a lot better over time, but I don't, it's nowhere near perfect. Also, how much guidance does the promoter tend to give in what styles to play and what works with their crowd? As far as I'm concerned, none. And I'd be annoyed if a promoter tried telling me what to play. By all means, tell me what their crowd normally likes. Do they like the more commercial side of my music, or do they like the more underground side of my music? The warm-up DJ should give me the biggest clues, because if he's playing at 118 BPM, then I know the crowd here generally is more in the deeper ploddy side. Whereas if the warm-up DJ before me is playing rinsing stuff out, big EDM tracks at 130, then either he's the world's worst warm-up DJ, or they've given me a clue as to what I should be looking at playing. So I don't think that's down to the promoter. And also, for someone like me personally, I'm not a massive crowd puller, and I've always said that. I don't expect I ever will be. But if a promoter is booking me to play at their event, they should be booking me for my music and my style of whatever it is that I do. And if a promoter booked me to play a gig and expected me to be playing trap or big, huge EDM chart toppers, then they've made a wrong booking. So I'm not going to play that, and so they can tell me to play that if they want, but it's not going to happen. It's not in my collection. I don't have those playlists. I don't have them on my USB sticks, so don't expect it to happen. I just, that again, that's the job of a promoter, should be to curate the night and book the appropriate talent. So if they're not booking the appropriate talent for an appropriate show, then that's their mistake, not mine. What is the longest set you've played? God, probably 12 hours plus, I would have thought. I did some live radio shows back in the day, probably 10, 15 years ago now. And I think the longest show I did there, I did like a charity thing that was about 9 hours. And then I guess also it depends on, like, I've done some club, sorry about that, camera ran out. Yeah, I've done some big like outdoor raves and stuff, where I've been booked as, say, the headline, so I start at like, I don't know, 1 or 2 and play till maybe 4 or 5, and you know, the DJ after, who was supposed to be after me, has sort of gone, carry on, you know, so I've carried on until maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 in the morning. It depends how good the gig is, but yeah, probably the longest I would say is probably 12 hours plus, something like that. I see there's a couple of replies. Oh, you've replied to yourself. P.S. I hope the soundtrack ambition comes to fruition. I'd love to hear that. Me too. I doubt it will, but it's one of those things that, like I say, you know, I think it's good to have dreams no matter what stage you're at in life, really. I know I'm always going on about Christian Henson's videos, who I do now subscribe to, by the way, thanks to probably your mentioning on this series, but he has some great tips on getting into that area. He seems to be of the opinion that it can be a bit of a thankless slog. Let's be honest, I mean, I get what he's saying about it being a thankless slog, but I think I consider a lot of my job being a thankless slog, because, you know, I spend a lot of my time doing sound design for clients who then go, oh, can you tweak this? Can you tweak this? Can you tweak this? And there's no thanks at the end of it. But also you get paid for it, so I'm not really complaining. And you know what? I've worked office jobs, and that's a thankless slog. You know, and I've worked call centre jobs, and that's a thankless slog. So as much as I'm not disputing Christian Henson, and you know, he seems like a really nice guy, and I really respect his opinion in a lot of things, and I don't think he's ever saying specifically anything other than his bit is a thankless slog, which I'm not disagreeing with. But I think also he would also agree that he'd rather be not getting thanked doing what he does than not getting thanked doing data entry in an office. Yeah, I think we have to sort of look at that with a bit of a balance where, yeah, okay, a lot of producers, DJs don't, you know, okay, maybe producer DJs get a bit too much thanks sometimes, certainly their ego suggests it, but the more sort of back level, I guess, like myself and him, you know, who work more in the background of stuff and do, whether it be, you know, his film score or drama stuff, and you know, with my production engineering side of things for other artists, you know, it sometimes feels like a thankless slog, but sometimes you've got to sit back and go, do you know what? Okay, I work long hours, and yeah, I get pissed off with clients sometimes, and yeah, okay, they mess me around sometimes, but at the end of the day, I work, okay, maybe slightly more hours than the average person, but not ridiculously so, and I have a roof over my head and food on a plate, and 90% of the time I love my job. So really I can't complain, and I think it would be the same if I was doing film score stuff as well. And also I like the challenge of sometimes, I think some of the other bits that other producers don't like, I actually quite like. So for example, doing music to an ad brief, sometimes a client can be very, very specific in what they want. I quite like that because I know where I'm going and I know how to do it as a sound designer, so I don't struggle in that bit, reaching that brief. It suits me to be told exactly what to do. PPS, how's the album coming along? Not going to stop hassling you about that. Please do carry on. It's getting there, actually, kind of, but still a long way off. I would be surprised if I was to have it finished by the end of this year, realistically. So where I'm at the moment in terms of thought process and workflow, I have an idea in my head of a sort of a concept of theme, and I want to stick at that, and I'm fairly certain that's what my first official big album should sound like. I have a folder in where I do all my Bitwig productions. I have multiple folders. So I have one called ZZ Archive, and the ZZ is because it, in alphabetical order, it goes down the bottom. So I'll have an archive of just crap I never finished or never would be anything, but I'll always leave them there just in case. Then I've got published, so those are obviously things that have been signed and released or processed in some way. Then I have, but I don't know even why I'm saying all of this bit, but anyway, I've got a whole series of folders. One of them is called Album ? And at the moment there are probably 15, no, maybe 10. In fact, I could tell you if I was had a look. Bitwig, Dom Kane, album. There are 17. Okay, so there are 17 tracks that I never fully finished but decided they were great ideas. And I recently, about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, went through this folder going, right, now I'm more confirmed on my concept. Are they right for it? And I thought I'd narrowed it down to about 10, but apparently 17. So yeah, so I'm kind of getting there. It's just going to be a long time. And I think also I had said this time last year when my first EP came out on Mousetrap, I had said I wanted to do another EP that year, and then I wanted another one or two this year, before then releasing an album at the end of this year. That's not happened, and I'm still quite firm that I feel I need a better run-up to it. So this year I've got my latest EP, which is signed to Mousetrap, so that'll be out in the middle of the year. I've also got a single coming out around the middle of the year as well for the summer. And so I'm hoping to get another EP towards the end of the year with Mousetrap if possible. And then maybe, I think that's maybe when I can start really thinking about an album. So I'm thinking end of this year is when I'm getting more serious. Realistically, it wouldn't happen until beginning of next year. So that's that. There we go. That's how I view an album. Please, if you guys have got other ideas on how you think I should think about an album, or because the thing is with an album, I find when you're putting out singles, you're just throwing music out there and it is what it is. When you're doing EPs, you kind of need a bit of a concept, a bit of a theme. It helps to have 2 or 3 similar sounding tracks that maybe stick to an idea. So there's a bit more thought behind it. Doesn't have to be. It could just be 3 club bangers. But generally speaking, people tend to put a bit more thought behind that. When it comes to an album, I feel like an album should be an entire body of work that people can listen to from start to finish. And I know that's getting rarer and rarer these days, especially with things like Spotify, because you just hit shuffle on a playlist and away we go. Which I do myself, don't get me wrong. I don't listen to albums from start to finish, but I'd like to be able to write an album that somebody could listen to from start to finish. And then you've got things like, well, do I start with slow stuff and go into the heavy stuff, or do I start heavy and go into slow, or do I mix and match and just change, so even things like the track listing and the order of tracks suddenly become important. With an EP, you start with your best and you move forward from there, kind of. Which I didn't do with Structures, but whatever. Whereas an album, I think there's a lot more thought behind those sorts of parts, and I think with the shelf life of a single, it hits the shelves a few weeks later, even if it's a hit, it gets smashed all over the radio stations and whatever all around the world. Great. But let's be honest, 3, 4, 5 weeks later, it's gone and forgotten. For the vast majority. With an EP, maybe that shelf life is a few months, I guess. one of you, I forget which one, sorry, one of you was saying that you were still playing my Structures EP. So, you know, that's like a year. That's a much longer shelf life. And the reason I think that is there is because you put a lot more thought into an EP. So for an album, you know, I mean, Christ, we're talking about what's your favourite album ever, and people say something like Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. Well, that's what, 30 something years old now and more. Yeah, you know, Mike Oldfield, Tubular Bells, damn, 40 years? I can't be right, but there we go. That's showing you the length of life of an album. And don't get me wrong, I don't think my album's going to be remembered in 40 years' time. But it'd be really nice if it was remembered in 18 months or 2 years. You know, I'd be pleased with that. So, yeah, there we go. Sunset 86 event high five. Big congrats on the 50th AMA. This is going to be a long one today, by the way, guys. My camera stopped at half an hour. We're at 40 something minutes already, and damn, still going through. Okay. Yeah. I agree about the statistics of other life in the universe. I was half expecting you to finish the video with a sub-37 rendition of Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds. In case you were wondering, having researched, according to Behringer, all their clones will be 100% analog. Previously mentioned, but yeah, awesome. That is good, to be fair. Especially as Behringer, by the way, I'm interchanging Behringer and Behringer. I never know what the G is. Is it hard G or a soft G? But either way, I think they're known as kind of the budget end of stuff. So if they're doing 100% analog, then that's great, because there should be more budget analog gear. And I hope it's still in the budget kind of range. I hope they're not overcharging for these things. They're supposed to be making clones of the Pro 1, MS-20, 808 and 909. 808 and 909 I'm done with, if I'm honest, but MS-20 would be cool. Pro 1 would be awesome. All for around £300. Oh, there we go. You've just answered my question. £300 is nothing, so that's great. Sounds too good to be true, but apparently it is. Cheers, Dom. As always, have a great weekend. You too. Yeah, that is good news. Ricky John. Hi, Dom. Great news about the next EP. Congratulations. Can't wait to hear it. Thank you very much. As for questions, I'm currently experimenting with trying to get sounds in specific spaces, forest, canyon, etc. My next on the list is underwater. I have a few ideas jotted and thought I'd ask how you'd go about it. There are some underwater microphones out there. I don't know if they're any good or not. There are also some, if I remember rightly, I've never looked into this properly, so don't take my word for it, but I'm sure there were, like, you can get underwater camera cases that are essentially a fishbowl, an airtight fishbowl, and there were similar for microphones, and you could sort of dunk them in, but they'd be weighted so that they'd sink. I guess I wouldn't be able to know any more than that without knowing what you were trying to get specifically in terms of sound and what kind of location. Are we talking a lake, or are we talking the sea, or are we talking whitewater rapids? I guess each of these would need different scenarios. The one thing I would say you should look into is insurance, because good luck with that. Microphones and water do not mix very well, but yeah, good luck with that though. It sounds pretty cool. I like the idea of having your own unique library of sounds for spaces like forests and canyons. That's awesome. Fair play. I want to hear more about that, so tell us more. Yanis Lukmelis. Hi Dom, congrats on 50th AMA and new upcoming EP. Maybe you could tell how important are speaker stands for the sound in your studio. I wanted to get just like yours, but ended up with ISO Acoustics, which you anyway should put on the desk. Bass now is a little better, but room correction software still is the main reason why I can get reliable sound in my home studio, and I have big bass traps in the corners. Event, high five. So bass traps are your best friend when it comes to studio acoustics. I will say that the room acoustics, the one thing I've learnt from building studios and working in different studios, your most important piece of equipment is your room. And I can't stress that enough. You could have a badass computer, you could have amazing monitor speakers that cost you 10 grand, you could have the best sound card and gold plated cables and whatever, but all of that is rendered completely useless if you're in this echoey box of a room. Simple as that. Your room should be the top priority. So in terms of speaker stands, for me, I like to work with a slightly wider than normal image balance. It's just for my own personal, it's a subjective thing, I think, and I like to also sit back a bit when I'm listening. So from here, I'm not making an equilateral triangle, which is you're supposed to have your monitor speakers. You and your monitor speakers are supposed to be an equilateral triangle. So at these angles, I should be back here. I don't know if I'm even in the shot here, but that's where my speakers are pointing. Now my speakers are pointing at me about here, and now I'm forming an equilateral triangle. And so I tend to work a little bit wider than normal, because when I'm working at stuff, I tend to be leaning forward and hunched over the desk. And then when I'm actually deciding, no, I need to listen now, I have to lean back, and then I'm in the perfect sweet spot. So for me, I work a little bit wider. So I would either need a really long desk or speaker stands, which is what I've got. The other thing then is I don't like to be able to feel the bass in the table, and I feel like when I used isolation mats in the past, you could still feel it in your hand and your wrist, and it kind of threw me sometimes because I felt like I wasn't getting a true image of the low frequencies. Maybe my isolation mats weren't that good, I don't know. So that, but that was a factor for me. Other than that, I just kind of like the look of stands. So I think there's a lot of factors in there. The other thing is, so at the moment, so again, being in the temporary studio, this table doesn't have the strongest of legs. I can give it a shove and I can see my coffee moving. So I think that's probably an important factor as well, is, you know, I mean, speakers of this size, these event Opals, like a billion kilos, you certainly don't want them wobbling around on a table. So I think that's another factor. It depends on the size and the weight of your speakers, and the size and the weight of your table as well. If your table is a big solid old table, then you're probably in a better position to have isolation mats. Second of all, or third of all, or fifth of all, probably by now, I don't know where I'm at. The other thing is, like, say, your general room, and so it's a mix of aesthetics and last of all, it's trial and error. So I don't think there's any right or wrong when it comes to having stands or isolation mats. I'm not sure if one is better than the other. I guess it depends on where you sit and how you want to work. So as I explained, for me, I prefer it a bit wider, so that kind of demands stands. And also, if I had maybe a more solid desk and much better isolation mats, I mean, in fairness, I've got isolation mats on these stands as well. Ultimate Support, they're called, and they're pretty good actually. You've got, I think there's a windy thing at the back, so I can angle the speakers up and down, and I can do all sorts with them. So they are pretty good. I have no idea what they'd be like if I put them on a desk, though. I don't think they're designed for the desk. I think they're designed for the stands. But again, I haven't tried, so I don't know. There we go. So bass is a little better, which is good. One of those things I found as well in my last studio, I found the bass really changed depending on how far away I put the speakers from the wall. And I found that 6 to 12 inches from the wall, I don't know why I'm giving you imperial measurements, it's no longer the 1930s, So I'll say 15 to 30 centimeters from the wall just worked for me and these Opals. If they were any closer than sort of 15 centimeters, the bass kind of disappeared a bit, and then any further from say 30 centimeters from the wall and the bass was just non-existent. It was terrible. Certainly that's true for the last studio I was in. So again, I think it's always worth it, if any of you guys watching this and you've got your own home studio or whatever, play around with your speaker placement. Okay, you might not be able to afford like these gig acoustic panels, although there are some great DIY ones you can do with some rock wool, and they will work just as well, to be honest. So look into that if you're on a budget. But aside from that, move your speakers around, pull them away from the wall a bit and then pull them closer a bit. And if you've got what did I recommend, Room EQ Wizard, it's a bit of free software. You need a microphone and a sound card, and that's basically it. You put your microphone where you normally sit, where your ears normally are, and you can calibrate your sound, and then it'll fire bursts of white noise, I think, and measure the room responses. Run a test, bring your speakers in closer, run another test, bring your speakers out wider, run another test, bring them away from the wall, run another test, put them against a different wall, run another test, and just keep testing it. You'd be surprised. In my last studio, I think I might have mentioned this once before in a video, in my last studio, behind where the camera was a control room window that I'd built in to the wall. And when I was building the whole studio, I had built it so that all of my equipment was going to be facing that wall with the control room window as my sort of booth view. And then the moment I'd finished building it, there were a couple of physical things, like the door placement was not quite suiting where, because as I've just alluded to, I like my speakers wide. So the door placement wasn't ideal. And then I ended up going, hang on, let's try it against this wall. And I tried it against this wall, ran another couple of tests, and half my issues had corrected themselves. So I then went, okay, I'm sitting here. You can't really predict. A lot of it is trial and error. So I would recommend doing a lot of those things. Moving on, DevMouse5. Hi Dom, event, high five. I have no questions really. Just want to say that I'm going to get brand new Behringer DT770 Pro headphones. You had the issue, 250 ohm ones, because mine got broken and I sent them for repair 2 times, and basically if they don't fix them in those 2 times, I get the right for brand new ones. So yeah, I'm really hyped about that. I couldn't use those headphones for almost 4 months now. Finally I'm getting new ones. Great to hear that you're getting new ones. Hopefully they're free replacements from, I assume, Behringer or the shop, I guess. So that's one of the reasons why I recommend people buy things direct from the manufacturer if you can. Case in point was, I've mentioned these event Opals. I bought them from a store, I have to admit, but then the support took over, and me being me, got quite lucky. I managed to have a contact at Rode who then kind of bumped me up the chain a bit in support, and I ended up managing to get replacements sorted through Rode. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy. I had to send them videos and photos and measurements and whatever else. But if you can go directly through the manufacturer, then it makes life a lot easier, because they're more likely to sort of send out replacements. And I will say right now as well, huge shout out to Rode for the way they handled the event Opal replacement, because they actually let me, and this was a discretional thing, so it's not standard procedure, I don't think, but they sent me a brand new pair while I kept the old pair, because they were just clipping and there were a few things that weren't working right. And so they sent me a brand new pair and let me keep both pairs for a couple of weeks while I sorted the swap out, because they recognised that I was a professional studio and I couldn't just send my speakers off to Australia for a month to be repaired. So huge shout out to Rode for that, because I thought that was amazing customer service. And that's what keeps customers loyal, because that's why I'm now using a Rode microphone. I've got the NT1A and I've got the Video Mic Pro and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, good. I'm glad you're getting your headphones back. Unknown Artist, hi Dom, massive congrats on the 50th video. Still checking in on the regular. Good. Can't wait for the EP. We'll be looking out for it. Read more. All the best, mate. Here's to the future. Cheers. Rod Marconi, event, high five. Looking forward to hearing your new EP. Thanks. Zombo, of course my question didn't show up for the 50th AMA. I hate you, YouTube. Question, I have seen some setups where they put their monitors horizontal. Why is that a thing? Or do people do it because it looks cool? So, I was thinking about this recently, and I probably should have my speakers horizontal. Again, with the event Opals, the tweeters, I don't know if you can see, there's 4 screw holes there, and these light up event things are magnetic, so you can pull them out, turn them on the side, and voila. The tweeters you can unscrew and unbolt, pull them out, turn them on their side, and then you can turn the whole speaker on their side and everything's still the right way up, which is a brilliant design. And the reason people do that is because the tweeters are supposed to be at ear height to the listener. My tweeters, if I'm totally honest, are probably 100mm higher than my ears ish. You should have your tweeters at ear level, and the reasons for that are just basic physics. And you should also have, let me get this right, tweeters on the outside cutting through the bass, or maybe the other way around, something like that. But they're supposed to be set up in a particular fashion because of the way different frequencies react with each other when they're both traveling in the same direction. So that's generally why. Also, our ears are built for hearing, certainly in the higher frequencies, it's more directional. So our ears are kind of custom built for hearing things at ear level. For example, lions and tigers that are about to jump out of a bush. You know, we're naturally built for that sort of a hearing, for very directional hearing. And we need to know if it's, you know, in the bush to our right or the bush to our left. So that's why a lot of people tilt them. I guess some people think it looks cool, because it kind of does in some respects. Certainly some of the focal speakers, the focal twin 6BEs were pretty much built to be on their side, and they looked awesome. So I guess it's kind of a visual thing as well. And my stands are not adjustable, and I feel like if they were 100mm higher, I would definitely tilt my speakers on their side. If they were 100mm lower, they'd be perfect. So I think my stands are just kind of the wrong size, or my chair and desk, or maybe I'm the wrong size. Who knows? Depends how you look at it. But yeah, that's the reasoning. Where did I get to? I'm getting to the end now. I'm going to have to reset the camera again and change the battery, so back in a sec. Okay, battery's on charge and I'm back. Right, we are really getting there now. This is going to be a long one this week. Right, Finn Fighter event, high five. Thank you, Dom, for giving your thoughts about these 2 analog synths. I bought the Korg for just experimenting and give tracks unique sound, but haven't done it yet because I don't have a proper sound card, so Korg lacks a lot of the sound indoor. And yes, Mini does have MIDI, which is good. So you got MIDI, you got analog, you got everything you need for £300. I'm impressed now. Next question is how you proper clock your analog synth indoor. Do you know what? Just don't worry about it. If I'm totally honest. Do you play MIDI and metronome at the same time to get the latency right in the analog synth channel? Well, first of all, one of the many reasons I love Bitwig is the fact that you can adjust for latency. You can hit a button on the hardware instrument and it will measure the latency and then delay the channel, or delay all the other channels accordingly to that. But second of all, and maybe more importantly, I kind of don't care about latency when you have a decent computer with a good sound card, and I highly recommend Audient for that. The latency is so low. I mean, we're looking sub 20 milliseconds, and on a big lead synth, unless I'm doing maybe a really stabby arpeggiator, the latency doesn't really bother me. And I've always said in a lot of my production tutorial type things, latency can kind of add a bit of a human feel to things. So I don't, not everything has to sound like a robot, and I think that's quite important in especially electronic music, because everything does sound like a robot. So we kind of need to deviate from that sometimes. Do I play to metronome? Yes, sometimes, but I will again always quantize it afterwards. So I'll quite often hit the metronome, hit record, and I'll play. I'm not a natural pianist, and that's another important thing. So I'll find a chord sequence that I like, and I'll play a chord, and I'll think, okay, I like that, and record maybe just that chord in, because I'm more concerned on recording the velocities of it if it's a polyphonic synth. And then I'll move to the next chord and sort of find a chord phrase, and I'll play that in as best as I can, knowing that I'm probably missing it. But I'll then open that MIDI and quantize it, but the velocity stays more natural, so the quantize is much sharper. And then I will allow that to loop as MIDI and feed that to the hardware instrument, and then record the hardware instrument in. So it's like it was a very good human playing it, basically. That's how I tend to go for it. Where do we get to? And can you give advice to get the right external sound card in a low price, 1 to 200 euros for that recording purpose? I think I just did the Audient. So this is the ID22. I think they released the ID14, and I can't remember how much that is, if I'm totally honest. Oh, apparently there's an ID4. Well, what's that like? That's tiny. Wow, £99. There we go. What have you got on that, though? Let me see this. I mean, yeah, if you're looking for low budget, you got mic gain, DI gain. So I'm guessing those are both possible to be left and right instead of mic and DI. Yeah, have a look into the inputs of that. You've got input, door, monitor mix, volume, mute, monitor pan. Here we go. Here's a picture of the back. L and R. Oh, that's the output. Input. You've got... Right, okay, no, so you don't want that. That's not what you want. Unless it's monophonic and you've only got one cable, then the ID4. Right, anyway, I'm not going to get into this right now. I think the ID14 was... yeah, there we go. It's under 200 euros, or around 200 euros is the ID14. I would recommend that because you've got a couple of ins, couple of outs, you've got everything you need. It's a super fast and really transparent. I mean, I've continually said that the Audient, I've got the ID22, and I've listened to it up against, I can't remember how much that was. I got a particularly good deal because of endorsements and stuff, but I remember when I first got it and I played it up against was a couple of Sapphires, and there was, I can't remember, but some Fire Pro. I can't remember. There was a load of sound cards that I put up against each other, and this was up there with basically sound cards that were, I mean, into the thousands of pounds, and this was a few hundred. So I would highly recommend Audient because it was just so much clarity and transparency in their digital to analog converters. So yeah, highly recommend it. St. Nicholas, hello Dom, my question is, how would I go about synthesizing a synthetic brass sound, a bit like a trumpet? With great difficulty, if I'm honest. the brass thing has always been one of those sounds that just doesn't, it's not easy to synthesize. You can't do it through wavetable unless you're using a Rompler that has a brass sample, but you certainly can't do it through subtractive synthesis. It just sounds like a wet fart. Can't really do it through additive. It's just kind of wet farty, but additive. So I don't know if you're asking me you want to make a synth sound exactly like a trumpet, or are you just looking for that sort of classic Yamaha brass sound? So probably need some clarity on that. I want to experiment with horn type sounds. If you're looking for something that sounds genuinely like a trumpet, you'd need either, if you're going to synthesize it, you'd probably need physical modeling. I don't know if there is much physical modeling on brass. I guess there must be. Someone's done it. I've just not looked. Otherwise, I would say go for some sample-based player like Contact Player. And there's plenty of people. In fact, Christian Henson's what's it called, Spitfire Audio. I'm sure they do a brass thing, as do Native Instruments, as do a company I won't mention because I don't like them. So yeah, I would certainly look into them. Would you recommend FabFilter Saturn? I don't know because I've not tried it, if I'm honest. Asking as I have Isotope Distortion plugin and the full Sound Toys 5 package. Just wondering if I need this another distortion plugin, but it does do tape saturation event. High five. You know what? I've always felt like you've got digital clipping, you've got wave distortion, you've got diode distortion, you've got saturation, and I think if you've kind of covered those with things like the Isotope Distortion plugins, you're probably not really going to find anything new. Not drastically. You might find one that has a better user interface, you might find one that maybe is easier to achieve a certain type of sound, but let's face it, distortion is distortion, and I use that term loosely because it's not really true. But if you've got a saturator, a tape type saturator, and a digital type clipper, and a wave shaper, those are really the three kinds of distortions that you're ever really going to want to use. And I think if you deviate beyond any of those three, no one's ever going to notice. So that's my view on distortion in general. It's not something I use a lot of. I'll use a little bit of saturation, of tape saturation on a mixdown or maybe a master, but that's about as far as it ever goes. And even then I'm looking at, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's only a few percent, so it's not something I do in a huge drastic way, and it's not even something I use as an effect, to be honest. Yeah, couldn't even tell you the last time I used a distortion plugin as an effect. I guess I just don't like the sound. But then, interestingly, I've never liked the sound of 99% of electric guitars. So maybe that's a clue as to why I don't use distortion. And that, my friends, is it. It has been a big one this week, she says. Again, thank you very much for listening. Yes, I will be hopefully starting to do podcast interview style stuff at some point soon. Still trying to sort out cameras. It's kind of turned into a nightmare where I see a DSLR and I'm like, oh, okay, that does video, great, that'll do the job. And I'm not even going to mention names or anything, but I have a DSLR on the floor here that arrived the other day, and I got all excited thinking that's going to be great because it's very similar to the one I have now, and it's going to be a great second angle, which is clearly what I need when you're interviewing two people. And the thing wouldn't even focus. Like it'll focus when you press the button, and then it holds that focus position, but the moment you move it doesn't track or follow or anything. My fault for being too cheap, but whatever. Right, so again, thank you very much for making it this far into the video. It's been a long one this week, so you genuinely do deserve some sort of award if if you've made it this far into the video. So I look forward to seeing next week's video. Please do keep the discussions going. I'll also say please do like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification button, get involved, because the channel is starting to grow now, and I love you all for being early subscribers. So to prove you've made it this far into the video, comment the word Canon, as that's what I'm looking at. I'll see you next week. Have a good weekend. Cheers.